All right, so have you noticed this too? Like, it feels like everywhere you turn, it's all about me first these days.
It's definitely been a topic of conversation. A lot of people are asking themselves, are we like seriously living in an age of selfishness?
Well, that's exactly what we're diving into today. And get this, we've got some seriously insightful stuff to work with from Dr. Talia Varley from the Cleveland Clinic.
Oh, wow. Cleveland Clinic.
She's like a total expert on this, and her article is going to help us figure out why this question even matters and what the science actually says about, like selfishness, altruism, all that,
Right.
and how it all ties into our well-being. But one thing that really struck me about Dr. Varley's take is that it's not just like some touchy-feely opinion piece.
Yeah.
She actually brings in real-world observations and data to back up her points.
Well, that's what makes it a deep dive.
Yeah.
Some substance.
Exactly. And she starts off by talking about this like noticeable rise in selfish behavior, especially after, the whole pandemic thing.
Oh, yeah.
Like, remember those early days? Empty shelves, people hoarding toilet paper.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
It was like every man for himself out there.
It really was. And Dr. Varley's point is that even now, that me-first attitude, it kind of feels like it's sticking around,
Yeah.
Like it's become part of the new normal. She even uses these everyday examples that are so relatable.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
Like rudeness in stores, nobody holding the door open for you anymore. Even airline pilots are complaining about passenger behavior.
It's so true. Oh, my gosh. Speaking of that, just the other day, I was at the grocery store and this guy like literally shoved past me to grab the last carton of strawberries. I was like, seriously, dude.
That's exactly the kind of thing Dr. Varley is talking about. It's like basic courtesy has just flown out the window.
Right.
And one theory she brings up is this idea of permacrisis.
Permacrisis.
Basically this feeling of like constant instability and uncertainty, like we're all on edge all the time.
Yeah, that makes sense.
When you're feeling that way, you're definitely more likely to be self-focused.
Right. Totally. Like survival mode kicks in.
Exactly. But here's where things get even more interesting. Dr. Varley cites research suggesting that COVID-19 might have actually changed personality traits in younger adults.
Wait, hold up. Like, change their personalities? How's that even possible?
Well, they're showing less agreeableness and more neuroticism, possibly because the pandemic messed with key developmental stages.
So, like, their brains are actually different now.
It seems that way. They use standardized personality tests and compared data from before and after the pandemic.
Wow.
The findings are pretty consistent, but the big question is whether it's a temporary blip or like a lasting generational shift. Only time will tell.
That is a huge question. But even if it is temporary, it still makes you think about the impact on, like, our collective psyche,
Right.
But here's what I'm wondering. If our brains are actually changing, does that mean we're just, like, doomed to be more selfish? What about all those stories of incredible altruism we see, especially during tough times? Didn't people step up and help each other out during the pandemic?
You're so right. And that's the paradox, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because we're actually wired for both self-interest and altruism. It's not one or the other.
So it's like both are kind of battling it out inside us all the time.
It's more like they both serve a purpose. Think about it from an evolutionary standpoint.
Okay.
Self-preservation, that fight or flight response, was crucial for survival in immediate danger, like facing a saber-toothed tiger.
Yeah, gotta run.
But for long-term survival, for us to thrive as a species, we needed cooperation, empathy. We needed to work together.
So we're like walking contradictions.
More like a spectrum.
Spectrum.
Yeah, it's not black and white. And here's the key. Where we fall on that spectrum, it's influenced by our experiences, our context, even interventions.
Meaning it's not set in stone.
Not at all. We can shift towards more pro-social behavior.
Okay, I like where this is going, but before we get too deep into that, let's address the elephant in the room. If we're wired for both, why does it feel like selfishness is winning these days?
That's a good question.
Is there something about modern life that's pushing us towards self-interest more?
Well, Dr. Varley has some surprising answers there. Ready for this?
Okay, hit me.
She argues that acting selfishly doesn't actually lead to greater well-being.
Wait, seriously, but what about all the treat yourself, focus on your own happiness stuff? Isn't that like the whole point of self-care?
There's a place for healthy self-care for sure, but Dr. Varley distinguishes that from what she calls excessive self-focus.
Okay, I see.
There's a real cost to constantly taking more than we give.
So what are those costs? What happens when we go too far down that me-first road?
Well, for one, she points to studies linking materialism to things like negative self-appraisal, self-doubt, even risky health behaviors.
So all that pressure to buy, it's actually making us feel worse about ourselves.
It seems that way. And it's not just material possessions. That intense focus on self-image, on looking perfect all the time.
Yeah.
It's been linked to anxiety, depression, relationship issues.
So it's like the more we try to focus on ourselves and our own happiness, the less happy we actually become.
It does seem a bit counterintuitive, but that's what the research is showing.
So if selfishness isn't the answer, then what is? If chasing our own desires isn't the key to happiness, then where do we find it?
That's where the power of pro-social behavior comes in.
Hmm.
And this is where things get really fascinating. Because when we shift our focus to others, when we start thinking about we instead of just me, something pretty amazing happens. Our well-being actually improves.
Okay, now you've got my attention. Tell me more about this whole pro-social behavior thing. What does that even look like in real life?
So it's basically any action that benefits others.
Okay.
Whether it's a grand gesture or something small and everyday, volunteering, helping a neighbor, donating to a cause, even just listening to a friend who's going through a rough time.
Right.
Choosing actions that put others' well-being first.
Okay, being kind and helpful. But how does that actually make our well-being improve? What's the science behind that?
Well, there's this growing body of research showing that acts of kindness, generosity, compassion, all that good stuff, it has some really incredible benefits, both mentally and physically.
Like, for instance?
Well, for starters, it boosts our mood, gives us an overall sense of well-being. It triggers the release of endorphins, those feel-good chemicals,
Yeah.
which leads to feelings of happiness and contentment.
So being kind literally makes us feel good.
It really does. And it doesn't stop there. Pro-social behavior also strengthens our relationships.
Okay.
When we help others, we feel more connected to them, and they feel more connected to us. This sense of belonging and social support that's crucial for our mental health.
That makes sense. We're social creatures, right? We need that connection. But you mentioned physical health benefits, too. Tell me more about that.
This is one of the most fascinating parts. There's evidence that pro-social behavior can lower stress levels, reduce inflammation, even boost our immune system.
Wow. Helping others makes us healthier.
It really is incredible. It's like this amazing feedback loop.
Yeah.
The more we give, the better we feel physically and emotionally, and the more likely we are to keep giving. Dr. Varley calls it an upward spiral of well-being.
I love that.
Oh.
Okay, I'm starting to see why this is so important, but let's be real for a sec. We live in this crazy, fast-paced world.
Right.
How do we actually make more time for this pro-social behavior? We're constantly being told to focus on ourselves, to hustle, to achieve. It feels like a contradiction.
That's such a good point. And Dr. Varley gives us some pretty practical advice. She says, start small.
Small?
Remember those micro-interventions we talked about?
Yeah, like those little 15-minute compassion workouts.
Exactly. Even little acts of kindness can have a huge ripple effect. Like holding the door open for someone, letting someone go ahead of you in line, even just giving a genuine compliment.
So you're saying even if we're super busy, we can still make a difference just by incorporating those small acts of kindness into our day?
Absolutely. And the more we practice them, the more natural they become. It's about building that habit of kindness, making generosity our default setting.
I love that. But what about those of us who maybe struggle with this? What if we weren't raised with an emphasis on kindness and generosity? Can we actually change those deep-seated behaviors?
Dr. Varley believes we can. And she brings up this really fascinating point. She says compassion and altruism aren't fixed traits. They're more like skills.
Skills.
Yeah, skills that we can develop and strengthen with practice.
Yeah.
Just like learning a new language or playing an instrument.
Okay, so there's hope for us yet, even if we're stuck in that selfish rut.
For sure. We're not doomed to be selfish. By making a conscious effort to practice kindness, generosity, and empathy, we can literally rewire our brains.
Rewire our brains.
Wow.
For more pro-social behavior.
Yeah.
That is seriously encouraging. It means we're not just stuck with whatever biology or environment we're given. We have the power to choose differently.
Exactly.
Which brings up something else Dr. Varley talked about that was really interesting. The difference between how men's and women's brains respond to pro-social behavior. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah. Studies show that women's brains actually show more activity in the reward and pleasure centers when they engage in pro-social behavior.
So women are just hardwired to be more caring and compassionate?
Well, it's not that simple.
Okay.
The biological differences are super interesting, but both men and women benefit hugely from pro-social behavior. And it makes you think about social conditioning, too.
Yeah, like nature versus nurture.
Exactly. Are women encouraged to be more nurturing from a young age?
Right.
Does that shape how their brains respond? It's complex.
It really is. It makes you wonder about the messages we all get about what it means to be a man or a woman today,
Right.
and how those messages influence our behavior even without us realizing it.
Definitely. And it highlights how important it is to encourage pro-social behavior in everyone, regardless of gender.
Right. No matter who you are.
We all have that capacity for kindness and compassion, and we all benefit from expressing it.
This is making me rethink so many things. We're always told, go after what you want, be your best self, put yourself first. But maybe the real key to happiness is actually shifting our focus outward, recognizing our interconnectedness and putting the well-being of others front and center. But doesn't that sound a little like self-sacrifice? Where do we draw the line between being kind and being taken advantage of?
That's a great question. And it leads us to another interesting concept that Dr. Varley brings up: healthy selfishness.
Healthy selfishness. Now that sounds like a contradiction in terms. How can selfishness ever be healthy?
It's not about being selfish in the traditional sense.
Okay.
It's more about recognizing that we have our own needs and boundaries.
Right.
And it's okay to prioritize those sometimes.
And you can't pour from an empty cup, right?
Exactly. It's about finding that balance between taking care of ourselves and taking care of others.
So it's about being otherish, like Adam Grant says.
You got it. That beautiful blend of self-care and care for others. Recognizing that our well-being is all connected.
I love that. Otherish. It really captures this idea that we don't have to choose between our own needs and the needs of others. We can create a win-win.
Exactly.
Where everyone benefits.
And that's the key takeaway here. It's not about wiping out selfishness completely, but about finding that sweet spot where we can thrive as individuals and contribute to a more compassionate world.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation. I'm seriously inspired to go out and spread some kindness.
Me too. And that brings us to Dr. Varley's final point. She reminds us that compassion and altruism aren't fixed.
Yeah.
They're muscles we can develop and strengthen.
So even if we're feeling a little rusty in the kindness department, we can still get back in shape.
Absolutely. Never too late to start flexing those compassion muscles.
Okay, so let's say we're all in on this pro-social behavior thing. Where do we even begin? What are some actual steps we can take to be more kind and generous?
Dr. Varley suggests starting with awareness. Just pay attention to how you interact with people throughout the day. Are you being mindful, truly listening, acting with empathy and understanding? You'll be amazed how many opportunities pop up to practice kindness.
So it's about being more intentional.
Yes, and it doesn't need to be anything huge or dramatic. It's the little things that often make the biggest difference.
Like what? Give us some examples.
Well, you could try smiling at people you pass on the street. Offer to help a colleague with a project. Call a friend you haven't spoken to in a while just to check in. Leave a positive review for a local business you love. Donate to a cause you care about.
Those are all great ideas, and they're totally doable even for busy people. But what about when we're feeling drained, running on empty? How can we be kind to others when we're struggling to even be kind to ourselves?
That's where that healthy selfishness comes back in. We can't give what we don't have right. So if you're feeling burned out or overwhelmed, it's okay to take a step back and take care of yourself.
So like putting on your own oxygen mask first before helping others, like they say on airplanes.
Exactly. Taking care of yourself isn't selfish.
Yeah.
It's essential. And it lets you show up more fully for others when you do have the energy and space.
This is all making so much sense, but let's go back to that original question for a minute. Are we really living in an age of selfishness? After everything we've talked about, what do you think?
That's a complicated question.
Yeah.
And Dr. Varley doesn't give us an easy yes or no answer. But I think what she's saying is that we have a choice. We can give in to the pressures and anxieties of modern life, retreat into ourselves and put me above we.
Yeah.
Or we can choose to cultivate kindness, compassion, and generosity, to build a world where we all thrive together.
And from all the research we've looked at, it seems like that second option isn't just the more ethical choice, it's also the path to real happiness and fulfillment.
Absolutely. We have the power to create a more compassionate world, one small act of kindness at a time.
So what can we do as individuals to start tilting the scales towards kindness? What's one thing our listeners can do today to make a difference?
I love that question. And I think the answer is beautifully simple. Just choose one small act of kindness and do it. It can be anything, but make it intentional. And then notice how it makes you feel. See the ripples it creates, both in your life and in the lives of those around you.
What a great message to end on.
Yeah.
But before we wrap up, I just want to emphasize something. It's easy to get discouraged when we see all the suffering and injustice in the world.
It is.
But it's so important to remember that even small acts of kindness can make a difference.
You're absolutely right. We don't have to solve every problem overnight. We just have to start where we are with what we have and make that commitment to being a little kinder, a little more generous, a little more compassionate every single day.
And you never know, those small acts might inspire others to do the same. And maybe, just maybe, we can create a chain reaction of compassion that will eventually change the world.
That's a beautiful thought. And I truly believe it's possible. We all have that power within us.
To make the world a better place.
One kind act at a time.
This has been an incredible deep dive. I'm feeling so inspired.
Me too.
And we hope it sparks some new ideas for you too. If you're ready to make a few more otherish choices in your own life, remember, even small acts of kindness can have a huge ripple effect.
That's right.
So go out there and be the change you want to see. Thanks for joining us.
Until next time.
Wow, we've really covered a lot of ground, haven't we? From like the rise of selfish behavior to the whole science of pro-social behavior.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey.
I gotta say, this whole conversation has really made me think differently about things. I'm seeing things from a whole new perspective.
That's what these deep dives are all about, right?
Totally. And one of the biggest things I'm taking away from this is that we're not just helpless bystanders in this whole age of selfishness thing. We actually have a choice.
Yeah.
We can actually choose to be kind, to cultivate compassion, to create a world that's more, otherish.
Absolutely. And it's not about being perfect or anything.
Right.
It's just about those small, conscious choices we make every day to put kindness and generosity first.
And those small choices can actually add up to something much bigger, right? Like Dr. Varley talks about this compassion contagion, where one act of kindness can inspire another and another and another.
It's like a ripple effect that spreads through our communities and even beyond.
So if we're really wired for both selfishness and altruism, like Dr. Varley says, what's going to tip the scales in our own lives?
Yeah.
What'll make us choose connection and compassion over self-preservation?
That's the question, isn't it? And I think the answer comes down to the choices we make every single day. It's about being aware of our thoughts, our words, our actions. Asking ourselves, am I contributing to a more selfish world or a more compassionate one?
And it doesn't have to be these huge, grand gestures, right?
No, not at all.
It's those everyday moments of kindness that can really make all the difference.
Exactly. Holding the door open for someone, listening to a friend who needs to vent, donating to a cause, even just smiling at a stranger.
And those small acts can have a huge impact, not just on other people, but on ourselves too.
Right. Remember all those studies about how pro-social behavior makes us healthier and happier?
Totally. So when we choose kindness, we're not just making the world a better place, we're making ourselves better too.
So a win-win.
Exactly, a win-win. It's like that saying, a rising tide lifts all boats.
Oh, I love that. And it reminds me of something else Dr. Varley said. She talked about how even small changes in our individual behavior can shift our collective consciousness.
Oh, wow.
We're all part of this big web.
Yeah. And when one thread vibrates with kindness, the whole web starts to resonate with that positive energy.
That's such a beautiful way to think about it. And it gives me hope that we can actually make a difference.
Me too. Because I really believe that kindness is contagious. The more we spread it around, the more it multiplies. And eventually, empathy, generosity, that otherishness becomes the norm, not the exception.
And on that note, we'll leave you with that thought. We hope this deep dive has sparked some new ideas and maybe inspired you to make a few more otherish choices in your own life.
Yeah.
Remember, even the smallest acts of kindness can make a difference. So go out there and be the change. Thanks for joining us.
Until next time.